Hello and welcome to another tutorial. This one's for the Mystery Knit Along 3, the Mystery Gnome. Gnome is where you hang your hat. When we were working the brim, just as we were transitioning from the brim to stockinette, I had you place a removable stitch marker on the 13th stitch of the round inside. And then shortly thereafter, we actually changed the beginning of the round to be in line with that. So you should have a removable stitch marker. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that to mark the place where we're going to begin picking up stitches. Now when we pick up stitches, we only need to pick up one side. So each stitch is comprised of a V, which you can see here on my needle with the high contrast there. So all we're going to do is we're going to pick up one side of that. I'm going to pick up the right side. And then I'm going to move on to the next row. Or not to the next row, to the next stitch. And to make sure that I'm seeing where I need to be placing things, what I'm going to do is I am going to pinch the brim here and kind of pull down here. And that helps me see what's next. If you need to, now that that removable stitch marker has served its job, we can move that out and then we don't have to worry about it getting in our way and fussing things up. And so we're just going to keep going on. We're just going to keep moving sideways so that everything lines up, so that we're not jumping rows or rounds. You can pick up and knit, but I find picking up and then knitting easier. So pick up and knit is when we have the yarn in our hands, we go through and then we bring the yarn through that loop, and the stitch that's on the needle is actually a new stitch as opposed to the leg of the stitch. But I find that when we're working inside the hat and trying to pick up with the DPNs, it's just a lot easier if we work on getting the stitches picked up right and getting that leg on the needle. And then we can worry about getting those loops knit. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm going to do one more. So that's this one. I'm going to pick up this one. Then I'm going to switch needles and go again and do 12 on each. And then when we come back, I'm going to give you a little tip about how to make sure you don't accidentally knit this inside out. All right, I have all my stitches picked up. Obviously, if you are working on 2 circular needles or doing magic loop, it's going to look a little different for you, but in general, you're going to have the stitches picked up just as the garter stitch turns to reverse stockinette on the inside. On the outside, obviously, it's stockinette. So by removing the temporary stitch marker, it's hard to tell which one is the beginning of the round, but if you look at the hat, there will be sort of an imperfect line up what is the back of the hat, where the stitch pattern doesn't quite line up, because when we knit in the round, we're knitting a spiral. So for instance, here, can you see how here that motif is nice and tight and it's a nice little circle, whereas here it's kind of wandering off? That is at that join. So if you could find that slight imperfection that's just kind of inevitable with color work in the round, then you know where your beginning of round is. So now I'm going to grab my color 1 and my 4th needle, and I'm just going to knit across. Now I'm doing what I've advised you not to do. I am going to be knitting this inside out. If you look, I'm looking at the wrong side of the work, but I'm knitting, which means my knit stitches, my stockinette side, is going to be facing into the gnome rather than out of the gnome. So we need to find a trick for not doing that. So I will unknit and we will sort of look at the anatomy of a round. So when I'm knitting, I had the back seam here and I was focused on that, so I picked that up and I started knitting, but I don't want the reverse stockinette side of the hat to be facing me. If I do that, I'm going to be knitting inside out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that seam line, just like I showed you before, and then we're going to move it so that the hat is facing down, and then we're going to pick up the needle at that seam line, and this is going to be the needle we knit, and we're going to knit it flat in front of us. and then V stitches are going to show on this side where the V stitches on the hat show up. Of course, we've got the brim flipped up, and that's going to flip down in a little bit. So if we now knit these stitches, oh, gotta grab that yarn, making sure to leave enough of a tail for sewing in. So you can now see that I'm getting the V stitches of stockinette on the same side as the V stitches of the stockinette on the hat, and that's just a little trick for making sure that you're not going to end up with the reverse stockinette side of your gnome out, which would be a little tragic in this case with the color work that you're going to put into it, and you know, put all the fanciness on the inside. That's not how we're going to do this. So that's the tutorial for this stage, picking up stitches from the brim. I hope that this helped you, and I wish you happy knitting and happy gnoming.